But here's the thing, the idea that your emotions are caused by old wounds is insulting to many people. And I remember how insulted I was when therapists would
Mm,
tell me that I was creating my own unhappiness, because it's so easy to see how other people are creating your own unhappiness. And
mhm.
when I think about in those early years of my adulthood, how, I was just barely keeping it together, carrying my own unhappiness, showing up at work, showing up as a parent, and then carrying the unhappiness of my parents that I had inherited. So it was all
Yes.
so hard that if you just told me, oh, well, just get rid of your own mud, it was like,
Mm,
it, it was just like, if I knew that, I would have done it. And it took
mm.
me many years. And really, I couldn't even hardly start until my kids left for college.
Yes. Well, when I use that metaphor, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that it's hard to see from the outside. And it's very hard to remove, dirt that's ground into seams. Like it's not easy. It's actually an effort, takes quite an effort to dig down and find out what's underneath the anxiety that you're carrying around all evening, or the dark mood that you come home from work with. And and there you are in the kitchen, part of family life. But yes, my sons and my husband haven't caused that dark mood. It's something that I brought in, I carried with me, and I'm the only one who can be responsible for my emotions.
Mm.
But like you, Loretta, I didn't realize how much I was impacted by. And sorry, this is probably not your story at all, but I had a father who was an alcoholic, uh, and and anger management problems. So um, there were tendencies that I carried into my marriage that not only affected my emotions, but also impacted the way I would show up if Carrie and I were having conflict, or the way I might react or overreact to something that he said, that might have been on a scale. Maybe it was provocative at a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10, but I reacted as if it was a 9 or a 10. So those examples were part of the mud that I had to pay attention to and then work through in those years. It's after several years of marriage, actually, is when that started to become apparent.
So let's say I decide to work on myself, but my partner is not willing to work on themselves. And in fact, they are very angry and offended if you suggest that they are carrying around mud from their childhood. So we
Mm.
have to start there because, again, I think that's what people are thinking.
Yes, I'm so glad you raised that, because it's something I get asked all the time. There is value in you doing your own personal growth work, regardless of what your spouse decides to do. In marriage, there really are no ironclad guarantees. Both of you are free to make your own decisions, and nobody's you don't have the ability to control what your spouse decides to do or think. And so I say, um, who you are as a person and the way you show up in your marriage is something you're going to carry with you anywhere. So if you do that personal growth work to figure out, why am I so anxious, or where is this depressive tendency coming from, or why do I fly off the handle when somebody talks about X? If you do that personal growth work to get underneath what's giving rise to those emotions, what you've been exposed to in the past and what's been hardwired into your processing, um, that's gonna translate. So even if, like, let's say it actually has a great influence. Let's say you do that work, you show up in your marriage differently, your spouse takes notice and says, "Oh, you are actually different. Hmm, maybe I should try this. I mean, sometimes that does happen. But other than that, I mean, the way you show up in your workplace, with your professional colleagues, in your parenting, especially your parenting, like you are going to have a legacy by doing that work, even if your spouse isn't interested or won't join you in that.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about mediation, since it seems like our hope for a happy ending. So tell us a little bit about how that goes.
Sure. Well, to be honest, most of the time, when people think about mediation, they're doing it as they're going through a separation. And there are couples who get into mediation and then discover that they've been able to get to a deeper level of conversation, and then they question their decision to get divorced, and they change course. But that's definitely the minority. Mediation is, in its essence, it's a process where you've got a third party who helps you to hear each other. So a mediator will not impose any decisions. Typically, if you want to avoid court and you need someone to make decisions for you in a marital breakdown situation, then you would go to an arbitrator. A mediator is there to help both of you engage a conversation at a deeper level. So it's common when couples have been in conflict, it's common to get sort of stuck in a rut of thinking, and a kind of rut of a perspective in the way you're seeing your spouse. And when that happens, it's very difficult to pull yourselves out without the intervention of someone else. So the mediator is there to balance out the conversation, to make sure that both people are having a chance to be heard, to maybe use some communication techniques to help people hear each other. And then usually there's a goal in mind, so to help them work toward making a decision that both of them can live with. Usually it's not either person's ideal, because typically when couples are not agreeing, there are positions, and I think X and Y, and there's some space in between, and we're both trying to convince the other person to move over to our side. And as that typically doesn't work. And when conflict is so entrenched, it's hard to move past the positions and the hurt feelings, and sometimes there's bitterness or resentment that's getting in the way. So the mediator is there to ask the why questions, and to make sure that if one person is a talker and the other one tends to be more withdrawn, that you would draw out the person who doesn't tend to communicate as easily, and put the brakes for the person who loves to talk. And that way they can hear each other and hopefully arrive at an agreement. It doesn't always work because it's completely voluntary. So in some cases, the level of disagreement, or the bitterness or unforgiveness maybe is at such a level that they're not going to be able to reach an agreement. But in some cases, it's the very best way to move forward, because it does do a better job of preserving the relationship. Because when you can reach an agreement that way, and it's worthwhile to do the work, especially if you have kids, then it does a better job of drawing you closer together, or at least into a more business-like relationship.
Great. So tell us about your concept of divorce cheerleaders and what the alternatives might be.
Sure. It's a tricky question. Like, as a term, divorce cheerleader, I'm going to give some context for everyone who's listening. So when I was working with a client, it was typical to have one person who had some friends or buddies who were really cheering them on, pushing them on. And sometimes it was it created some problems because it created unrealistic expectations. Because, things that you hear through the grapevine, such as, oh, the kids are going to live with me and he's going to have them every other weekend, though that might not be realistic in the context of this couple and these relationships. So, so when I talked about divorce, a divorce cheerleader, I think what I was trying to convey is that there isn't a one size fits all solution for everyone. And sometimes our friends, and who have all the best intentions, can feel like, this really worked out well for me and it's really going to work out well for you too. And you need to take this step. And so they might sometimes nudge somebody toward taking the path of divorce when, maybe the relationship still was viable and there was some work that could still be done, just so that you would know one way or the other whether the relationship could work or not. So, I rose that term, and I guess I used that term, divorce cheerleader, to help clarify that, everybody wants, their friends to be happy, and everybody, has, I mean, most people will be thoughtful about their friends. But it's such an emotional time if you're going through a divorce or you have gone through a divorce, that, sometimes what you hear, you need to take a step back and just evaluate it in the context of your own relationship to see whether that's a solution that is best for you right now.
Of course, exactly, because I
Okay.
see it so clearly that people in your life are going to easily support you and say you're right and your partner is a jerk. And
Mm.
you point out that that kind of friend or that kind of counselor or therapist who often takes that position, they're not necessarily serving your best interest, but it's very rare to have a friend who might point out the other side, but that may be the friend that you need to have in your life, someone who's not just going to say, oh yeah, you're the good guy and they're the bad guy.